Hello, my name's Barry Sherlock. Welcome to this video on digital publishing, which is based on a virtual meeting held in September 2021 in the hands-on local history programme of the Hampshire Archives Trust and the Hampshire Field Club. It was arranged by myself and Roger Otterwill. It's an edited version of the meeting, which was hosted by Sue Woolgar, Honorary Secretary of the Hampshire Archives Trust. It deals with making electronic pages for publishing local history in digital productions, in place of the conventional printed page. We'll shortly hear an expert view from Heather Needham of the Hampshire Record Office, but first, a few preliminary remarks. This session grew from an earlier one on conventional publishing, at which it was mentioned that the book is likely to be replaced by other forms. It's not yet clear what these forms might be, but they will probably involve an amalgam of PDFs, ebooks, MP4 files, podcasts, web posts, etc. Professionals are already well into digital publishing, but non-professionals have only just started. And surely, new generations in the future will be mainly digital. There are potentially great advantages in digital products. Large numbers of pictures and even film and sound can be easily integrated. Complete documents or hyperlinks can replace references, and this is all relatively cheap by comparison with print. None of this is difficult, it just requires a modest amount of technical know-how. Whatever digital products are produced, it's surely prudent to keep a hard copy as fallback. And finally, it's likely that for a long while, the printed page will endure alongside digital products. So, we now continue with Sue's introduction to Heather's overview of the subject.
Speaker of the evening is Heather Needham. Heather probably needs no introduction to many of you. She's worked for a number of years now at Hampshire Archives and Local Studies, formerly known as Hampshire Record Office, where she's in charge of all things digital and beyond, as she will no doubt tell you. So without further ado, Heather, may I ask you to give your introduction to the digital world?
Thank you very much, Sue. Yes, I've just passed my 20-year mark at Hampshire Archives and Local Studies, but that's little in comparison with some of my colleagues. So we're all very long-serving members of staff there. So welcome to this evening's event. Falls to me to set the scene. So I'm stressed that I am just touching the surface. This is only a summary just to lay out the landscape. So the terms book and publishing now mean different things to different people. Just try Googling digital publishing. So digital formats give rise to wider possibilities in publication, but many people still like to hold that long-standing printed format in their hands, whether or not they have access to other formats via a digital device. Despite this, a digital approach to disseminating research is increasing, and this covers print on demand as well as reading something on a digital device. So this evening we'll be touching the tip of the iceberg for this topic, and we may find we have more questions than answers at the end, as I'm sure our speakers will prompt much discussion. So as Sue was saying, I'm Heather Needham, and my current job title is Digital and Media Archives Manager for Hampshire Archives and Local Studies and Wessex Film and Sound Archive. It's a good job we don't have printed name badges because I'd need a bigger shoulder, I think, for all of that. In my job, I'm the recipient of digital publishing outputs, and I'm responsible for managing their preservation for future access, which in itself is a relatively new and challenging aspect of the professional archivist role. Digital preservation and access are all about preserving and providing access to items which are now born digital, but in the past may have existed as hard copy, such as your publications. If you put a book on the shelf in the right conditions, you'll still be able to read it in 50 years' time. If you put a CD on the shelf, will you be able to read it in 5 years' time? Or will you just have a nice shiny coaster? And what about websites? Did you know that Hampshire Archives and Local Studies curates the Hampshire collection in the UK Web Archive? We know that there are websites which would fall within our collecting remit if they were in the more traditional format, so we're working with the British Library and with the site owners to add them to the UK Web Archive to ensure their preservation for future researchers. You may be thinking about you should be thinking about the preservation of your work from the outset, if it's in digital format, rather than in, say, 10 years' time. Will the format you've chosen still be accessible in a decade? So if it's helpful, please do discuss this with your relevant local archive service. I'm also involved in the management, not the actual making of dealing with requests for the use of items to be reproduced in publication and broadcast. So that applies to whatever format you're planning to publish in, including on websites. And I know this will be mentioned this evening. So as we look across this prairie of digital publishing, we'll have the opportunity to consider whether for our magnum opus we want to do publishing in exactly the same way, or whether we want to take a different approach, or how we might we make our publication even better using these new digital tools that are available. What other options are there beyond the PDF, possibly the most common format for the digital printed page? Many of the same principles apply to digital publishing as to its hard copy equivalent, especially in the field of local history, such as sourcing items and seeking permission to use them, as mentioned, as well as the proofreading, the structure, the validation, and the peer review. Legal deposit also applies to digital publications. So, as well as tackling all these exciting whizzy possibilities, there are also, of course, the more mundane aspects still to tackle. Wessex Film and Sound Archive I should speak about particularly, and I know my colleague Zoe Viney is appearing in the next of these sessions. Wessex Film and Sound Archive does not own a lot of the film material in its collection, and so we need to check with filmmakers or their families to ensure that they're happy for their work to be used in a particular way. In many cases, the film you may be seeking to use could be a home movie, so there might be family connections to check out. Other possible approaches present them in the digital realm. For example, self-publishing becomes much more practical with digital formats, although you may find that marketing is the hidden cost, as it falls on you and not on your publisher. Think about how you will maintain your own rights in your work as well. Going digital means that your material can be presented in a wider variety of ways beyond text on the virtual printed page. The approaches could include presenting your work as a podcast or a vodcast, which is a video podcast, a podcast which contains video content. Perhaps you might want to embed your sources or links to them in your document. This latter approach could enable your readers to have first-hand experience of the audiovisual formats you embed, if they're available to view online, or maybe even the website you cite, if it has a permanent URL or is part of a web archive. Digital publishing can provide for a conversation with your readers, which may generate even more information on your subject. But with a mechanism for immediate feedback, such as a comments box on the blog or a web post, comes the question of how and whether to respond to comments, whether they are positive or negative, and potentially from a much wider audience more immediately. I would suggest that engaging this wider audience would have many benefits, encouraging more into thinking about history of their communities as our successors in this field. So you should be thinking about your readers anyway when publishing, of course, and the same is true of digital publishing. In addition to readability and grammar and spelling and so on, I'm sure you will all be thinking about what format or formats you're planning to use, what tech you and also your readers might have available, whether that is hardware or software. Using proprietary software may deliver a whizzy product, but are you using software which is sufficiently widely available to your audience? Do they need it to access your work, or is there a reader view available? There are accessibility standards, of course, which apply to web pages. So please do think about these whether these will apply to your publications, whether that might be in terms of font size and type and colour, page colour, or pop-up boxes to explain images to an automated screen reader, and so on, to ensure the readability and the appearance of your pages. Those considering delivering online learning should also be aware of maybe potential digital poverty amongst their potential audience when planning their sessions. And we're all aware of the challenges of providing digital devices to school-age young people just recently. If you're planning to use video footage as well, you'll need far more material than the planned length of your finished video, as when you come to review it, more of it will end up on that cutting room floor. You may have come across the term optimization, which refers generally to a website which adapts its presentation according to whether it's viewed on a PC, a tablet, or a mobile. And this may be a factor for you to take into consideration. To get an idea of the impact of this on delivery and access, test out some websites you use regularly on different devices. You may also want to consider what features of those sites appeal and what drive you mad. Many of us produce digital documents on a regular basis, and so we all have the basic skill set necessary to start to explore digital publication. Many of us also use Microsoft products such as Word, and there is also its publisher package as well. There are also others available, including non-proprietary or open source products. These should be much easier for archivists to preserve, as the code behind them isn't a secret as it is with Microsoft. However, as the authors, this isn't something you probably need to worry about. So, how can local historians make more use of the developments in the digital world? Experimenting with new tech could be a steep learning curve, but it may be worth the effort to enhance your product. In the next session, as I mentioned, my colleague Zoe Viney will cover how you might consider using archive film, perhaps to illustrate your publication, whether that is itself a written item, such as a blog or a website. Alternatively, you may want to start with a piece of film and write an analysis of it as a historical resource itself. Thinking of using digital resources as the basis of your research, how about browsing a web archive such as the UK Web Archive I've already mentioned? There is the feeling that archives are now widely available online, but I can assure you this is not the case for the majority of the items we look after. Hampshire Record Office, which is the home to Hampshire Archives and Local Studies and Wessex Film and Sound Archive, holds archives on 8 miles of shelving, and only a fraction of them are digitised and available online. Archive cataloguing standards were developed just as digital collections management systems were in their infancy, so work much better as a means of producing printed pages. However, new standards are developing which are better able to provide for more up-to-date, flexible and changing cataloguing practices which provide for multiple access points, and you can extend that analogy to your digital publication. These cataloguing standards are also better for cataloguing born digital objects such as your digital publications. So this evening's speakers will offer practical approaches to the subject so that you can be in charge of the tech and not let it dominate you or influence your work. Their suggestions may inspire you to think outside the box, as the cliche goes, but I'm sure you will still have your eye on the product and how to ensure your message isn't lost in the digital delivery. I'm sure tonight's sessions and those in the next session in October will provide food for thought for future sessions and discussions. So that's the end of my introduction. I'm sure it just skated the surface, so I'll hand back to Sue.
Thank you, Heather. That set the scene very well. Thank you very much.
Now follows a presentation by Sam Butcher at the Hampshire Cultural Trust, which is a successor to what used to be Hampshire Museums.
Hi there. So I'd like to start by thanking both Hat and the Phil Club for organising this session today and for inviting me to talk to you. I'm Sam Butcher and I'm part of the Hampshire Phil Club, and I also work with the Hampshire Cultural Trust and the collections team, where I work supporting researchers in researching and using images from our image collection. So the topic I've been asked to talk about today is researching and using still images in digital publications. So over the next 15 minutes or so, I'll briefly cover key places you can go to find digital images. I will cover image supply and image licensing, and I'll very briefly touch on formatting images for digital use. So first of all, when I talk about images, I'm really referring to anything that you might want to use as an illustration in your digital publication. So it could be a historic photograph, it could be a museum object or an archive, a document that you found in an archive. It could also be a generic photograph, a stock photograph to use to illustrate your point, or a photograph that you've taken yourself. So when sourcing illustrations, the best place to start is wherever you're doing your primary research. You'll probably come across many illustrations throughout the course of your research anyway. But if you don't come across any illustrations, then there are many hundreds and thousands of different places that you can go to find relevant illustrations. Best places to start really depends on what your topic and what your research is. I've included a couple of key local ones here, which could be useful starting points for you. There are obviously museums, and I've included a couple of them here, the Hampshire Cultural Trust, where we covered the whole of the historic county of Hampshire through to Christchurch, and then Southampton and Portsmouth museums as well. But there are many more local museums that you could look at. Obviously, museums have objects as well as maps and artwork and historic photographs. Then there are local archives, and again, I'm sure you've used and visited many of these organisations before, and the list I've added really mirrors museums, to be honest. The one exception being the Dorset History Centre, where at the Hampshire Cultural Trust we cover the historic county through to Christchurch. If for archives, you need to go to Dorset for that. The one key collection that both museums and archives collect are historic photographs. So if you're looking for historic photographs, then you might want to contact both museums and also archives. It's not just physical local institutions. There are a whole host of websites that you can go to that have potentially relevant illustrations for you. So for example, if you're looking for archaeology for objects, the Portable Antiquities Scheme have an excellent database recording chance archaeology finds across the country, but including Hampshire. And most of their images are free to use and free to download. So you might find relevant archaeology images on that website. If you're looking for maps, for example, again, both archives and museums collect maps, but the National Library of Scotland have an excellent online database, their map finder tool, as they call it. And on this database, you can see historic maps for the whole of the UK. And again, most of them are free to use and free to download. So it is a really good potential tool to use. So it's not just about old objects, documents, or photographs. You might want some modern images to illustrate your document, your article as well. So if, like me, your camera work isn't very good, you can go to a site like Geograph. And Geograph is a site I use fairly often. It's really a community-driven site where users upload photographs that they've taken in the local area and across the country. And it has a really good local Hampshire arm to it. So, for example, the photograph I used on this previous slide of Silchester Bathhouse, that was one from Geograph. Most of their images are free to use and free to download under Creative Commons licensing with certain conditions such as crediting the image source and the author. So many thanks to Philip Pankhurst for uploading that image there for us to use. So you might not necessarily want local photographs, you might just want a generic stock photograph to illustrate your point. Now, there are many sites that charge you for this, but one that has a good number of free images to use is a site called Unsplash. And again, a photograph that I used on this previous slide here of the person holding the transparent slide is one I took from Unsplash. Again, it's free to use, and in this instance, no credit was necessary for the use. So that's another site you could go to depending on what kinds of images you're looking for. So once you've found the most relevant institution, the next step really is researching those photographs. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with researching skills anyway, but the best way to start really is through online catalogues. most of the institutions that you will look at will probably have an online catalogue or an online database. So at the Hampshire Cultural Trust, we launched a new site, what we call Online Collections, a couple of years ago. I've included a link to it in this slide. But Online Collections gives a good overview of the collections that we have in our collection, in our stores. Not everything that we have is on there. We're working to grow and increase it, but it gives a good start point. You might find a relevant illustration on there, which would be great, but equally you might then have to contact us to find what else we have in our collection which isn't on the Online Collections database. So when contacting us to ask for illustrations for a publication, it's always best to give as much contextual information as you can. Let us know why you want the image, the illustration. What specifically is it that you're looking for in that image? We've recently at the Cultural Trust launched a new image request form. Again, I've put a link on this website for you. But what that request form does is really tries to give us as much information as we can about what you're looking for, and it'll just help us answer your query as quickly as possible. It may enable us to search in different ways or give suggestions about different places that you could go to find relevant illustrations. If you do visit us and to look for illustrations, or wherever else, what other institution you do contact, I think it's always best to think laterally with your search terms and think broad with your search terms as well. So street names or house numbers change all the time. People's names change. You also need to think about what would the person who documented that photograph or the object have recorded. So you might need to think about what is, if you're researching a building, for example, what's the building next door to? Is it near a school or a church? Might they have recorded that? You might need to search broad, search for, say, a street, and then manually look through the photographs, look through the results, and narrow it down that way. So whilst we at the Cultural Trust always welcome researchers to our stores, with historic photographs, we welcome, and it's great to do it remotely. If you get in touch with us, then we can have a look ourselves through our database, send any relevant images to you to look at from home. So making it easier for you to look at and use our collection. Of course, once you've then found a relevant illustration that you might want, it's always best practice to give us the accession number or the reference number, so we know we have the right photographer or the right object, and we can quickly find the image for you. If you don't know that, then that's fine. If you've seen an image on a website, then you provide a link to us to that website. Or if you've seen an image in a book, then it's always best, if you can, to provide a photograph or a scan of that book page. Often people provide us with book references, and whilst that can be useful, we so often don't have every book in our library that our photos are included in. So a copy of the page the photograph is on will make it easier for us to get the right image to you. So once you've identified your images, you need to get a copy of it. So many institutions may let you photograph objects in the stores whilst you're researching. Again, some might charge for that. And some might take photographs for you and then supply you with a digital copy. Again, sometimes there might be a charge for that as well. Very recently, the Hampshire Cultural Trust, we reviewed our charging policy, our charging structure. So we no longer charge for the supply of low resolution digital images. We do still charge for high resolution images, but for digital publishing, a low resolution image should be absolutely fine. You also need to check whether the image that you want to use is in copyright or not. So normally copyright would be for a historic photograph 70 years after the photographer has died, and many modern many modern objects, for example, that a museum may give to you will still be in copyright. So do check with the institution about whether it's in copyright or not. Again, at Hampshire Cultural Trust, we now have Creative Commons licensing for our objects, providing you meet a certain few conditions. For example, it's for non-commercial purposes. So if you want to use one of our images which is still in copyright, there may not be a charge for you using it. And Creative Commons licensing is a great way to find images as well. So Geograph, as I said about, or just directly through the Creative Commons website, there are a whole host of images which are free for you to use. So once you've worked out licensing, you've either got a license or it's out of copyright and free for you to use, do remember to check what the correct acknowledgement or the correct credit should be to make sure you reference where your source was from. Finally, image formatting. So you should aim for a file size of around 500 KB. You don't want your image to be too small. If the resolution is too small, then it will pixelate and it will detract from what you're trying to say. If the resolution is too high, then the image will be slow to load for some users. And you want a pixel width of something like 1,500 to 2,000 pixels in width. That will be pretty good for digital screen resolution publishing. With file type, you want to make sure it's either JPEG or PNG file format. JPEG is probably the file type you're most familiar with and have used before. PNG is good for if you have simple black and white text, something without much detail behind it, a black and white image. But I think PNG is also good because you can have transparency. If you're using a logo, you can easily remove the background. I think if in doubt, just stick with JPEG. You may want to edit your image and adjust the color or the transparency of it. There's plenty of free image editing software available, so your PC probably has some sort of file on there that will allow you to edit images. Apple products definitely do. If you don't have anything and you do want to adjust the color balance or something, you can use online tools such as befunky.com, which is completely free to use and safe to use as well. I tend not to do much editing of color balance or contrast at all. I tend to supply images purely in their pure raw format. All I do is edit the image size, the file type, the pixel width to make it right for the digital content that I'm supplying it for. You can use things like Photoshop. I tend to find Photoshop can be a bit like cracking a walnut with a sledgehammer. Personally, most of the time I just use Paint because it's simple, it's easy to use, it's on just about every single computer, at least for the moment, and it's free to use. So I've included a screenshot on this slide of how in Paint you can really easily change the pixel width, change the resolution, change the file type to make it appropriate for digital publishing. So that was a really brief run through on images for digital publishing. And if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Sam's talk has given many great ideas for researching and editing illustrations. They will generally need to be integrated into text, and the next talk by Martin Coppen explains how to do this with software widely available. Martin retired as vicar of Hurstbourne Priors in 2013. He takes a particular interest in history from a religious point of view. He formats article for the Andover History and Archaeology Society journal, Look Back at Andover.
The author has done the research, read the sources, pondered the topic, and written it up into an A4 draft with illustrations. Copy editor has checked it through with the eye of a peregrine falcon and amended it into the house style. But what I'm going to talk about comes next. putting the various articles into a uniform format, in this case for an A5 booklet. It doesn't even involve reading the masterpieces, with quite a small skill set. After all, it only involves training a word processing program to do what you want it to do. Tedious, unexciting, but you do end up with something to show for your time and effort. So please bear in mind that I'm only sharing my practice. There are other ways which produce the same result. It's a bit like training a dog. You have to be utterly consistent, but realize that there will be times when it still does just what it wants. And then you need to be patient, careful, not get frustrated. Well, I can only speak about using Microsoft Word 2016, but I think any 21st century word processing program is likely to have similar features. And the main set of tricks you need to master are up here on the ribbon. It's called the Styles menu. But you have to train each style to do what you want, not be bound by its default setting. There's some preparatory work to do on the author's TypeScript. Authors try to help you by doing some formatting themselves, like centering a title or indenting the first line of a paragraph. It's kind to them, but actually it usually makes more work. It looks right, but it's been done the wrong way. Overuse of the space bar. So my first suggestion is to reveal the author's formatting by clicking the pilcrow or paragraph mark on the ribbon, and then remove the spaces manually, the better way, or automatically. The problem with the latter is that you may accidentally lose all helpful formatting like italics and superscript note numbers. For the moment also, I suggest strip out the illustrations. We format the author's A4 original down to A5. And so the first task is to copy and paste the stripped down author's text into the new document. Now we teach it a variety of tricks to get it looking like what we want. All you do is to place the cursor on the title line and click the title style. Then you place the cursor in the first paragraph you want to format and press No Indent. Each style is a powerful tool for bringing consistency across a long document. But there is more. Right-click a style and you reveal its format settings, each of which can be changed by you. Even better, in Word, once you have assigned each paragraph or heading a style, if you decide, for instance, that another typeface or size looks better, you can now change it all automatically. Right-click the style, select another font, and when you reset it, every paragraph in that style will automatically be modified. Now, rather yawn-inducing for normal people, but it puts a twinkle into the eye of this useful idiot. But from my experience, it's illustrations which cause the real difficulties. And what I recommend is that your author puts them in the draft wherever she wants them as a guide, with the caption underneath. But what you work from is a separate illustration sent in a standard picture format, JPEG or TIFF, of as large a file size as they like. But these first need photo editing in a separate program to a common standard, summarized as being a minimum of 200 dots per inch DPI and sized for your page width for A5, around about 12 centimeters. Nothing is gained by a much higher resolution nor size. The only thing it does is to increase the final file size of the document. On the other hand, sharpness is lost with lower definition. Given the photo editing program and your ability to use it, that is the suggested foundation. But the real trouble begins when you try to place the picture where the author wanted it in the new Word document. An illustration and caption on an A4 page are likely to fill half of it. Inserted pictures have a habit of jumping around, displacing text flow across pages, and generally causing havoc and headache. But the answer lies in the text wrapping options in Word. 2 tips may help. First of all, be very careful where your cursor is when you insert the image from your file. If at all possible, not in the middle of a paragraph. And second, neutralize the effect on the text by using the tab layout options, choosing the wrap option and fix position on page rather than allow it to float around. Word offers very useful ways of enhancing your picture also through the picture format ribbon tab, including converting it into grayscale. So I suggest using the caption option and style to rather than just inserting it as text after the picture. The final task is to save it as a PDF file, which your word processing program will do automatically. And that is what you send your copy editor for rechecking. It only causes havoc from my experience to send your Word file and then receive it back corrected from them. Experience shows that they don't really travel well when opened on somebody else's computer. And in fact, I found it's easier to make the next set of changes yourself from a list of amendments which the copy editor has made, rather than have your work potentially mangled, which might then need reformatting. So in summary, many of us feel quite dominated by the technicalities in the computer programs we use. They are very clever. But really, of course, it ought to be the other way around. As the better sort of 1850s Hampshire might have said, they actually are our servants, and we should leave them in no doubt about keeping in their place. So good luck to you in your work.
That was a great introduction to the use of Word for formatting pages. Now Martin will demonstrate on screen some of the procedures he described in a live edit.
So I'm going to, first of all, change the layout and size of the page, and we'll change the size to A5. I'm going to reduce the margins because they're obviously very large at the moment, and this will then become my working document. I want to see what's already on there, and I discovered that the formatting and other things have been done by inserting lots of spaces. So I'm going to remove the spaces in a quick manner, simply by putting in double spaces here and then replacing it with nothing. So that should remove all those spaces. Made 85 of them, so let's close that. There's still one or two things left, so we'll change that. Just remove those manually, and we'll join up these two together. No particular reason for having that, so this now starts at the top. But what I want to do is to set up a heading. So I'm going to call this heading 1, and I'll use that style. But that style, I think, needs modifying because I don't want it in blue. So I'm going to modify it, and the first thing I do is change it to black. I'm going to go for Arial in this document. I'm going to change its size to 14 instead of 16, and I'm going to put it in the center of its line. And the other thing that I would do is look at the paragraph. It's given it a lot of space beforehand, so I'm going to reduce that to none, but I will give it some space after. So simply by clicking that, I put it up to 6. So press that. That's how it looks, and press that, and then I've got a heading style which I can easily put in anywhere. I'm now going to put in the normal. Let's revert that back there. So we now put it into normal, but I also want this to go into the Arial font, so I'm going to make some changes with that, and change it to Arial, and change it to a slightly smaller font, and then if we just look at the paragraph, don't want quite as much as that after, so in fact I'll put it down to 6 again. So simply by clicking OK, then that does that, and because everything else was in the normal font, that has changed as well. So I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm simply going to centralize that particular line. So I've got my heading now and my introduction. For the purposes of this, I'm going to remove the picture and just work on the text. And I'm only going to make one other change now. There is a caption style which can be used for this, but I would add it as a caption to the picture when that's reinserted. So I'm going to turn family history here into heading 2. So it simply adds in at present the default one, and I'm just going to modify that, and again I want it in black. Don't want it in Calibri. I'll put it in Arial. I'll put it in 12, and I will put it in bold as well. So that shows me how it is, and I want a bit of a spacing after it before it begins the next paragraph. So put that in fact down to 3, I think. So that's just shown you how a few things start. Now, if I wanted to make a drastic change to the normal one and decide, for instance, that I wanted it all in a different font, all I need to do is to press that, and the whole thing will change automatically in that way. So just a quick introduction to styles and to putting in headings and changing them. So I hope that is of some help.
Martin, I had no idea that Word could do all of these things that you've outlined to us today. I've used it for years. I have struggled with images wandering around my documents. I know how to fix it now, so thank you very much for that.
Now we consider a few questions that arose from the session. First, following Heather's talk, it was asked whether the cataloguing protocols she'd mentioned are publicly available and whether they can be adapted for local needs.
The cataloging standard we currently use is called the International Standard for Archive Description (General), popularly known amongst archivists as ISAD-G. In theory, it should be adaptable to local circumstances. It covers just about any aspect of an archive you would want to catalogue, but even for professional archivists, the approach is you don't have to use every field for every item. So you could see it as a useful framework. You could see it as a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And I know at least one community archive software supplier has built that standard into their software, but not in the way that you know you were using something like that. It supports you through using it in a painless way. Yes, you can use it. If you Google International Standard for Archive Description General, you'll find it. But if you have a look at many archive services online catalogues, you'll be able to see how it's used in practice and look at the types of material that we have that you also have. So, for example, photographs or letters or diaries. And you can see how we use a limited number of fields and not the whole range of fields that the standard covers.
Okay, thank you, Heather. That was very illuminating.
Another question concerned charging for images. It was asked what the Hampshire Cultural Trust regards as commercial.
Yeah, non-commercial use. So non-commercial use, basically anything that generates income for the user of the content, basically. So with that, there's a grey area in there. There's no black and white rule as what non-commercial would be. I think it's really a case-by-case basis. We would look and assess what commercial might look like.
Okay.
I think we are as a team, we are members of various local organisations and are out to support those groups as well. We aren't necessarily here to hide and keep and charge an arm and a leg for an image.
Okay, that's.
And there was a follow-up question about local history societies that produce publications that they sell, but merely to recover costs. Is that also regarded as commercial?
It would depend on a case-by-case basis. So yeah, it's something we'd look at when or if or when the situation would arise.
Martin's talk was based on Word, and questions arose about the use of other formatting software, including Microsoft Publisher.
I've got an allergy to Publisher, and it arose because people used to send me orders of service in Publisher, for occasional, it might have been for weddings or for funerals or whatever. And because I didn't have it, I could never open them. So it just sort of set up a sort of frustration level. As I understand it, I mean, and then it didn't seem to be particularly portable to the lesser quality of word processing, things like Word or WordPerfect. But as I understand it, probably the strength of Publisher is that it's very good at producing leaflets, with illustrations and boxes and, sort of clever artwork, which actually you can do in Word. But maybe it probably doesn't make it as easy for you to do it as it would in Publisher. And I think the question I would ask about Publisher, and I, simply, I say I'm prejudiced against it, is whether you can actually save it into PDF. I mean, I would imagine now you probably can.
Yes, you can.
But in a way, that's the key. And because that is the key, almost whatever you use doesn't matter.
No, I mean, that illustrates Heather's point earlier, doesn't it? You know, that you must produce things in a way with your audience in mind. So if people can't open what you send them, then it's pretty frustrating, putting it mildly. Yeah.
That is the end of this first session on digital publishing from research to page. A second session on page to product will be posted on the Hampshire Field Club YouTube channel in due course. Thank you very much for watching this production, part of the Hands-on Local History programme at the Hampshire Archives Trust and the Hampshire Field Club. Thank you very much and goodbye.